Welcome to Vacancy TV. I'm Executive Editor Michael Johnson. I'm joined today by Jose Lopez, the lead organizer of Make the Road New York, and Tom Waters, the housing policy analyst of Community Service Society. Thank you very much for joining us, guys.
Thank you for having us.
And I wanted to talk to you guys because obviously rent regulations and 421A and a lot of the housing policies are coming up at the end of the year. And as Albany starts to get back into the flow of things, there's a lot of advocates organizing. Already, I know you guys are organizing some stuff. So just give us a quick preview of what you guys have planned in the coming weeks.
We're about 6 weeks out from June 15th. And so we are going to be picking up on all fronts for the course of the next 6 to 7 weeks to be sure that this issue of the rent laws is the primary issue that we're discussing both locally, but most importantly in Albany at the state level. On May 14th, we're going to be having the Rally to Save New York City. And this is going to be a rally calling on thousands of tenants and allies to come to downtown Manhattan at Foley Square to really elevate the issue of the impacts on particular communities, low-income immigrant communities, folks who live in rent-regulated housing, and highlight what could happen if on June 15th we don't vote in favor of the tenants. And so we are expecting thousands of people. It'll be kind of a huddle and rally again at Foley Square, where we will then move to the borough of Brooklyn to highlight that this issue is not just a Manhattan issue as posed by many folks, but is an issue that is impacting communities across the 5 boroughs and across our city and state. So it'll be exciting to plan for this event over the course of the next 2.5 weeks. And if you're watching on May 14th, please join us at 5 p.m. At Foley Square.
Great. Now to the policy aspect of this a little bit. Obviously, you guys are advocating for continuing rent regulations. I think that's the basic aspect of it too. I'm sure you want some stronger rent regulations to some extent, but obviously that's been opposed by Senate Republicans vehemently in past years. Seems like they're going to also be opposed to it this year. So I guess what are you hoping to get out of the rent regulation negotiations from a policy standpoint? What things do you think could be improved or should be improved? And I guess what is realistic?
Well, the most important thing is to stop the erosion of the rent stabilization system through deregulation of apartments. Since '93, landlords have been able to deregulate apartments during vacancy by spending money on repairs, and it's often a very good investment for them to do that, and we've lost hundreds of thousands of apartments that way. And you can extrapolate out, that will be the end of the system. Not too long from now. It also politically weakens the system. And it provides an incentive for landlords to harass tenants to get them out if they think they can deregulate the apartment for the next tenant. So that is a huge problem, and it's the number one problem. Our platform also includes proposals that would make rent regulation work better for the tenants who are rent regulated by getting rid of excessive rent increases that are allowed under the system, especially during vacancies, which is the main reason why so many rent-stabilized tenants are paying unaffordable rents already.
And I know that the Governor Cuomo had put in the tenant protection unit, and that had been started to at least somewhat stem the tide of the people with the vacancy decontrol and like making the improvements to get people out. Do you feel like that's done enough, or that can be improved possibly as a way where maybe like the laws aren't rewritten, but that organization is given more power?
They've caught a lot of landlords cheating, and they've re-regulated apartments that were deregulated illegally, and that's really good, not only for the tenants who can enjoy the benefits of rent regulation now, but because it shows that we were right when we said that the loopholes in the system were leading to unjust deregulations. They would need to increase the size of the tenant protection unit to be the biggest thing in Albany for it to catch all of the cheating that we think is going on. A lot of its value is showing the need to make laws that don't have these loopholes in them.
And I was just wondering if that was more, I think, a more realistic probably approach to be able to because it seems like the rent regulation fight is the best you could probably get is kind of getting them re-upped to the current laws, re-upped. Senate Republicans don't seem like they would go for anything new. Would the tenant protection unit maybe be the alternative route to kind of get to that stuff?
Well, last time they made it a little bit stronger.
Yeah.
they created the tenant protection unit, although that was done administratively, not in the law. And they raised the vacancy threshold, which may not have made very much of a difference, but at least it was a gesture in the right direction. And that was done with, the same players, plus a New York City mayor who didn't support rent regulation. So if anything, we're a little bit stronger than we were when we made a small amount of progress last time. So we are expecting to make some progress on the soundness of the laws as well as getting them renewed.
And as an organizer, you obviously probably are very, very hopeful that, if you get enough support, build a big enough coalition, you can probably have some impact. Is there any targeted approach you're taking to maybe hit these Senate Republicans to convince them that maybe they should be a little bit more amenable to some of these changes?
Yeah, I think our approach is to continue to organize our bases at home and continue to make sure that tenants in these apartments understand what's on the line over the course of the next 6 weeks and really engage them in this fight. At the political level in Albany, the reality is everyone's on the radar, right? Leadership is on the radar. Last week we were extremely disappointed in the governor's comments regarding the need to renew the rent laws, but no mention of strengthening the rent laws, and also on the call to amend 421A when we have been pretty clear about our message to end a program that is giving over $1 billion a year to developers who are providing very little to no affordable housing for our families. And so in Albany, of course, the leadership is in our sight. The Republicans are a major concern, and so we are going to be going up every Tuesday for what we call Tenant Tuesdays to continue to talk to our state legislatures. And really, this is something that we're going to need our assembly to step up on, right? We're going to need the assembly to hold the line and to be sure that when negotiations are happening in June, that we're talking about not just a renewal, that we're talking about ending deregulation, and that we're talking about closing all of the loopholes that are pro-landlord and anti-tenant. This is a moment where we can't wait. I think that's the difference, and that's the sense from a lot of the members who are walking into our doors. Every day I'm seeing tenants who are paying 60 to 70% of their monthly income on rent, and we just can't wait, right? We can't allow for rents to continue to skyrocket, for families to continue to suffer. And so June 15th really is where we're set and where all of our work is going to be happening over the next few weeks.
And it's just to do the brief history of this. It's always been 4 years, pretty much every 4 years. This is re-upped, or the agreements are always short-term agreements, and it seems like that's something that continues to happen. So we continue to have this very high intensity debate and discussion over where people live every 4 years. Do you feel like this is a process that needs to just be reformed in general? I mean, it seems to me like you don't want to have every 4 years people who have to worry about what's going to happen with their homes, and maybe if they see it happen every 4 years, they know that things change only slightly every 4 years. They might not pay as much attention, so then you have to also continue to get them motivated to be like, no, this is important again. So I don't know, is there a sense that maybe you guys would rather not do this every 4 years?
Well, if we had the laws as strong as they should be, then not having to do it every 4 years would be good. I mean, as it is, the 4 years is the opportunity to make progress, as well as an opportunity for the other side to make progress, which they did many times and up until the last renewal. But until we get it right, we do need to revisit it.
That makes sense. Is the sense that you guys have do you think that the debate will continually always just kind of be about just rent regulations in 421A? Do you think this debate will always kind of be a situation, because 421A is this tax break for developers that the Republicans always seem to get in return for the rent regulations being re-upped? It seems like that's what always the debate kind of comes to do. And obviously, as you mentioned, 421A, you don't feel like it is used appropriately, but it seems like that's the kind of what you have to give up to always keep getting the rent regulations. Is there something else that can get introduced into this debate to kind of make the situation kind of change direction a little bit? I don't know if there's another bill, another law, another concept that could kind of get introduced into the negotiations?
Well, 421A wasn't always expiring on the same day as rent regulation. That happened, I forget when.
I think 8 years ago. but
Since I've
yeah.
been involved in the issue,
Yeah.
that was a change. And J51, which is another tax break for developers, also expires, I think, on June 30th, but it's pretty close to the same.
And they always get lumped together in the final days of the session. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's shifting. That's Albany works by making packages out of different issues. That seems to be the way it works. But I don't think that, you know, the packages and permanent things come and go in their relationship to other bills.
And obviously, rent regulation is probably more important. Upping rent regulations or strengthening them is probably more important than the 421A tax cut, scaling that back. Is it a situation where if you did get more on rent regulations, would you be okay with, you know, having maybe 421A be upped again so you have that equal mix? Or is it a situation where you really feel like 421A at this point needs to get scaled back and is not working?
I think, you know, for the tenant who's walking into Make the Road, whether it's happening in Brooklyn or in Queens, and this is likely true for other tenant organizations across the city, there's much less interest from the tenant perspective on how we're negotiating come June 14th, really, or June 15th. Really what folks want to know is whether or not we are standing with them as tenants on the right issues. This is about good policy and bad policy, not about how we trade one for the other. And so good policy for our tenants means that we end deregulation and we strengthen the loopholes for the rent laws debate. Good policy for us also means that when you have a program that really builds no affordability in communities like Bushwick, like Jackson Heights, like Elmhurst, where our members are, and continues to gentrify those communities at the rates in which they're being gentrified, then we need an end to that as well. And so ideally for our folks, what we're talking about is we need to renew the rent laws because that's good policy. We need to end 421A because that's good policy. And then we need to talk about, with the generation of those dollars, how we continue to promote good policy that really supports low-income immigrant New Yorkers who right now are struggling every day to pay the rent and put food on the table.
That brings me to a policy that's talked about a lot in recent years, the re-upping of Mitchell-Lama housing, or the redoing of Mitchell-Lama housing going forward, something that Jeff Klein has been a big proponent of proposing, and many other lawmakers have talked about kind of reinvesting into this program. And I know you did a report not too long ago called Reinventing the Mitchell-Lama Housing Program. You co-authored that report, but Tom, and can you just tell us a little bit about kind of what your focus is and your thought of how this should be re-implemented going forward?
So in our report, we look at what Mitchell-Lama really was, try to cut through some of the rhetoric and say what type of program it really was and what made it work. And Mitchell-Lama, people think of it as a middle income program, which was what it was intended to be. You know, they said there were people who made more than $6,000 a year, but less than $10,000 a year back in the early 60s when that was more money, who, you know, they had incomes that were too high for public housing and too low for the market. It's the same rhetoric we always hear today. And the program was supposed to benefit people in that band, but nothing ever works the way it's planned, and it ended up benefiting both many people with lower incomes than that and some people with higher incomes than that. So it was really a pretty broad mixed income program with a large low income component. And I think that is really what made it a great program. So in our report, we are trying to say to people who say bring back Mitchell-Lama, bring back, you know, housing that's targeted for the middle, and say we can even do better than that by having a program that includes the middle but also addresses the incredible shortages, the worst housing hardships that are facing really low income people. And we show that it does cost money to do this, but that you can do a substantial amount of this work with money that's a big commitment, but it's not, you know, impossible.
And what was the biggest takeaway from what your findings were? Was this a situation where you think this is something that's doable, or were you just kind of trying to correct what you saw were some misinformation that's out there about the program?
Well, I was motivated to do both of those
yes.
things. But you know, the state has withdrawn to a huge extent from housing production as a priority. The city spends 10 times as much of its own money on housing production as the state does. This probably should be about the same. And in the past, when they created Mitchell-Lama, the state was a leader. I mean, you know, President Johnson's Great Society housing programs were copied from New York State's Mitchell-Lama program. So we were really the leader in regenerating housing policy in the 60s. That's not true anymore. They are doing some things, and they've modestly increased funding for housing recently. But if it's not impossible for the state to do the kind of thing it used to do and that the city does today with committing real resources to producing affordable housing. So here's a way to do it that builds on the success of our greatest achievement, Mitchell-Lama.
And just to note that Mitchell-Lama is actually named after a senator and assembly member from Albany. That's why the bill is, or the program is called Mitchell-Lama.
Right. McNeil Mitchell was, liberal Republican from the east side of Manhattan, and Albert Lama was a very progressive Democrat from Brownsville, Brooklyn.
I guess before we let you guys go, I just wanted to get a sense of how you think this is going to play out going forward. Obviously, it's tough to predict. You obviously want the best outcome. In the past, this always comes down to kind of the last week. It seems like there's things slightly shift here and there. But what do you think is going to happen this year? Do you think it's going to kind of play out the same way? It's going to be final minute negotiations. And I know the one thing that advocates have been very upset about in the past is that you usually don't know what's happening until the last 48 hours. You don't see the bills until the last 40 hours. Is there any way to avoid that, you think, or is that something you just kind of have to accept at this point?
I think for us organizationally and as a coalition, our goal over the course of the next 6 weeks is to do all the work that we can to hold Albany's feet to the fire here. Mm-hmm. And so on May 14th, I think we're going to start that, and we've already started that, but we're going to kind of escalate and really have this rally to save New York City. Post May 14th, we're going to be going up to Albany by the hundreds and the thousands to continue to take over the Capitol and take over the Legislative Office Building, to highlight that this has to be the number one issue in the state this year. Unlike other things, the reality is that on June 15th, the laws expire. And if they do, what we're going to see, even acknowledged by the governor in last week's talk, was that we're going to see absolute chaos and madness here in New York City as landlords continue to try and evict people to raise rents and generate profits. And so we need to be sure that we're doing our job. We're going to continue to do our job. We're going to be meeting with folks from downstate, from upstate. We're going to be knocking every door of every building in New York City. Again, I encourage people to come out on May 14th and then post May 14th to stay engaged and hop on buses with us to Albany so that everyone across our city and state understands how dire this issue is for everyday New Yorkers who right now are struggling to get by.
Okay. Well, Jose Lopez from Make the Road New York and Tom Waters from the Community Service Society, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.